The Sea Green Roadster That Roared, for Allison Lasley. Bridgehampton, New York, May 2001. I run an eager hand along a sinuous thigh where she lies, waiting, silky and sexy. Soon we slide together, like fingers in a glove, onto the low-slung seats, and rouse the engine to a tiger's roar, then ease her out into the crisp night air, crunching the courtyard gravel. You shift into first and take us away, around and down the owl-dark drive, gliding under glassy stars, below the outstretched arms of towering trees, carry and grace to catch a thief, racing along your seaside corniche, feeling electric and alive, loving the sudden, secret romance of it all. Welcome, and thank you for leaning in to the latest floating poetry broadcast, the 51st in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from Shelter Harbor, from the clear and salty coastal waters of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Last week we had an inquiry and discovery around being and staying in touch, close touch with the earth. This week I'm inviting you to ponder the alchemy of memory and to remember what's truly essential as we live our lives, as you move through your precious days. As always, I've conjured up varied cultural commentary, poetry, thoughts, and lines of fresh inquiry. So, let's venture in, shall we, and discern what we may together. But we might begin with some words from the 91-year-old Lebanese-American poet, philosopher, and painter, Etel Adnan, who I referenced in another program, on memory, the self, and the universe. In her book, Night, interesting book, she said this: memory and time, both immaterial, are rivers with no banks and constantly merging. Both escape our will, though we depend on them. Measured, but measured by whom or by what? The one is inside, the other outside, or so it seems. But is that true? Time seems also buried deep in us, but where? Memory is right here in the head, but it can exit, abandon the head, leave it behind, disappear. Memory, a sanctuary of infinite patience. Is memory produced by us, or is it us? Our identity is very likely whatever our memory decides to retain, but let's not presume that memory is a storage room. It's not a tool for being able to think, it's thinking before thinking. It also makes an apparently simple thing like crossing the room possible. It's impossible to separate it from what it remembers. We can admit that memory resurrects the dead, but these remain within their world, not ours. The universe covers the whole, a warm blanket. But this memory is the glue that keeps the universe as one. Although immaterial, it makes being possible. It is being. If an idea didn't remember to think, it wouldn't be. If a chair wasn't there, it wouldn't be tomorrow. If I didn't remember that I am, I won't be. We can also say that the universe is itself the glue that keeps it going. Therefore, it is memory in action and in essence, in becoming and in being, because it remembers itself, it exists. Because it exists, it remembers. Memory sews together events that hadn't previously met. It reshuffles the past and makes us aware that it is doing so. It is within us and reaches out, sometimes missing the connection with reality, its neighbor, its substance. Thank you, Etel Adnan. Well, let's hear from Virginia Woolf, from her timeless masterpiece, Orlando. If you don't know that, it was also a fascinating film that was based on it. Great read and a great view. She wrote in that book, nature, who has played so many queer tricks upon us, making us so unequally of clay and diamonds, of rainbow and granite, and stuffed them into a case, often of the most incongruous, for the poet has a butcher's face and the butcher a poet's. Nature, who delights in muddle and mystery, so that even now, the 1st of November, 1927, we know not why we go upstairs or why we come down again. Our most daily movements are like the passage of a ship on an unknown sea, and the sailors at the masthead ask, pointing their glasses to the horizon, is there land or is there none? To which, if we are prophets, we make answer, yes. If we are truthful, we say no. Nature, who has so much to answer for beside the perhaps unwieldy length of this sentence, has further complicated her task and added to our confusion by providing not only a perfect ragbag of odds and ends within us, a piece of a policeman's trousers lying cheek by jowl with Queen Alexandra's wedding veil, but has contrived that the whole assortment shall be lightly stitched together by a single thread. Memory is the seamstress, and a capricious one at that. Memory runs her needle in and out, up and down, hither and thither. We know not what comes next or what follows after. Thus, the most ordinary movement in the world, such as sitting down at a table and pulling the inkstand toward one, may agitate 1,000 odd disconnected fragments, now bright, now dim, hanging and bobbing and dipping and flaunting, like the underlinen of a family of 14 on a line in a gale of wind. Thank you, Virginia Woolf. Well, around her thoughts, let us, in terms of what to remember, things to remember, let us remember the impermanent nature of life, of our lives. Perhaps beginning a little bit with this poem of mine, like the tide. This ever-changing life of ours, restless and constant in its arrivals and departures, ephemeral and confederal, bringing friendships, moments, enlightenments in, carrying lives, chapters, sentiments out, showing us its natural flow of highs and lows, fullness and ebbings, its breathing like balancing act, the beauty and mystery of our earth-shared impermanency. And how about remembering, sort of a little riff on Virginia Woolf, what the natural world is made of, and in essence as vital, I would say, and as valuable as our own, maybe even more so. And toward that is this poem of mine, Precious Earthly Fluids. As precious as the ones residing inside your body, that you may exchange with another, that flow too through the body, the living, loving body of the earth, ones here to share with you essence to essence, but only with awareness of great reverence for their equal seminal preciousness. So each joining and exchanging you make with her, that she makes with you, and these nectars, these rare earth elixirs, becomes an act of intimacy, an act of union, an act of beauty. Precious earthly fluids. I came across Oliver Sacks again, but in a different form, in his reflections in his book Hallucinations, where he wrote, we know now that memories are not fixed or frozen like Marcel Proust's jars of preserves in a larder, but are transformed, disassembled, reassembled, and recategorized with every act of recollection. For researchers in the early 20th century, memories were imprints in the brain. As for Socrates, they were analogous to impressions made in soft wax, imprints that could be activated by the act of recollection. It was not until the crucial studies of Frederick Bartlett at Cambridge in the 1920s and 30s that the classical view could be disputed. Whereas Ebbinghaus and other early investigators had studied rote memory, how many digits could be remembered, for instance, Bartlett presented his subjects with pictures or stories and accounts of what they had seen or heard, were somewhat different, and sometimes quite transformed on each remembering. These experiments convinced Bartlett to think in terms not of a static thing called, quote, memory, but rather a dynamic process of, quote, remembering. Well, the on memory and identity. The Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano defines one kind of memory as idiot memory, the kind of remembrances that keep us attached to our old self-images and trapped by them. But lively memory, on the other hand, is a feisty approach to our old stories. It impels us to graduate from who we used to be. We are the sum of our efforts to change who we are, he says. Identity is no museum piece sitting stock still in a display case. Thank you, Eduardo Galeano. I invite us all to contemplate that. So we can spontaneously or consciously go down various memory lanes. Here's poet Linda Hogan traveling there. This is called Walking with My Father. In the dark evening, my father and I walked down the road to the old house where my grandmother lived, and we see through the door an old woman's feet, lifted up, tired, on a footstool, still in her thick stockings, the feet with legs and stockings looking just like grandma's after bearing 9 children who lived, standing, working all day, the kind of woman who made stacks of toast, platters of eggs for all of us each hot morning, did laundry, then lunch, supper, and worked with the animals or cleaning fish the rest of the day. I want to go open that door as I did so many times in the past, remembering not to slam the screen as everyone would yell, although I am now also older and finite, the seams of myself coming apart. How I wish I could go to that woman with her legs up and rub her feet, put liniment on her legs. Years have passed through the doors of that house, of memory, doors of the past, and my father's eyes are sad looking in, his own memories, not mine, thinking maybe of his mother and some of his old belongings, the stolen colt of his own father, the bracelet he gave me with his R.A. number. Her memories are unremembered, as my grandfather's, as those before them. I think of what this poem is about, only partly about memory, our many losses. And walking with my father, I walk with my grandparents, among the first to be numbered. Number 1556, number 1555. Thank you, Linda Hogan. Can you remember your early on days, those in your family, whether they were uncles or aunts or grandparents or glowing figures who left large impressions on you? The scenes or the feelings and or the sense or tastes of any of those times and those people. Well, my grandfather was one of those indelibles, and I've written various poems about him and loved him dearly. And he loved the children especially, and this was one of my memories of him for my grandfather. It's called whiskey sours, but let me have a sip, not of whiskey, but of some spring water. We're done with the winter water, we're into the spring water. Then we'll get to the summer water, which can be rosé actually, but we're not there yet. So whiskey sours. Now I know why you love the taste of that froth and tartness and whiskey on your tongue. The wisp of a sip I had of it each time you kissed me on my boy lips when you came to visit. Now that I have in my later years come to appreciate and ably make that classic cocktail, among others, that sour, 2 parts bourbon, 1 part freshly squeezed lemon juice, simple syrup and egg white, all dry shaken, then again with ice, poured and now held in my grown man's hand, that you'd appreciate, that we'd clink with, grandfather to grandson, and in return, that I sip and savor and raise here quietly to honor those sweet days and my always good memories made of you. So a toast to him and a toast to all of those indelibles of yours, past, present, or to come. Well, when summer does come, and hydrangeas bloom, I'm mad for hydrangeas. I recall my grandmother on the other side of the family, my mother's mother, and her abundant garden. And standing there one day, and it just seemed like there were just endless amounts of hydrangeas of all kinds. And I wound up growing them in my own seaside gardens over the years, many, many decades after that. Maybe partly in an unconscious homage to her, partly conscious. But every time my heart sings when I think of that moment. It's called You and Your Blue Hydrangeas for my long-gone grandmother, Lillian. A clear moment of early memory. When I beheld you among your bountiful blue hydrangeas, there blooms the shade of Uncle Frank's eyes, somewhere between porcelain and periwinkle. The color of your soul, I think, blended now with the endless ocean-born sky. Well, if and when you do cast yourself back in time and place to your youth, your childhood, as I like to do sometimes, what do you especially remember? Well, my own childhood summers, among other seasons, but summers were so golden, and here's a taste of those for you that might spark you back to some of yours. It's called The Barber in the Dell, and it's remembering my childhood summers in Bay Head, New Jersey, so down on the Atlantic seashore. The Barber in the Dell, who wore a green plastic visor the color of a ginger ale bottle, who had a raspy voice and Charles Coburn kind of face, a forever bachelor who wore spectacles he could barely see through, which is why he sometimes clipped your ear with his quick silver scissors, whose name was the same as the sign on the window by the striped pole, Dell's, whose small single-story shop and sole chrome and leather chair sat between the shingled houses facing Twilight Lake, in the town by the sea where my boyhood summers swam, where my mother brought my young head of sun-blonde hair to be cut now and then by the green-visored old barber in that dell. Here's a poem by Linda Beards from her collection Flight. She's a very interesting, granular kind of poet, often writing poems, sort of reimagining historical moments and writing beautiful poems about them. And here's a piece of hers called Wonders. Wonders. In a wide hoop of lamplight, two children, a girl and her younger brother, jump marbles on a star-shaped playboard. Beside them, in a chair near a window, their father thinks of his mother, her recent death, and the grief he is trying to gather. It is late October. The hoop light spreads from the family through the window to the edge of a small orchard, where a sudden frost has stripped the fruit leaves and only apples hang heavy and still on the branches. The man looks from the window down to a scrapbook of facts he is reading. The spider is proven to have memory, he says, and his son once again cocks his small face to the side, speaks a guttural "oh," as if this is some riddle he is slowly approaching, as if this long hour, troubled with phrases and the queer turn in his father's voice, is offered as a riddle. There is the sound of marbles in their suck-hole journeys, and the skittery jump of the girl's shoe as she waits, embarrassed, for her father to stop, to return to his known self, thick and consistent as a family bread. But still he continues, plucking scraps from his old book, old diary of wonders, the vanishing borders of morning paper, the ghostly shape in the candled egg, beak and eye etched clearly, a pin scratch of claw. A little sleet scrapes at the window. The man blinks, sees his hand on the page as a boy's hand, sees his children bent over the playboard, with the careful pattern of their lives dropping softly away, like leaves in a sudden frost. How the marbles have stalled, heavy and still on their fingers, and after each phrase the guttural "oh," and the left shoe jumping. Thank you, Linda Beards. Well, speaking of the past, I wrote this for a lovely young lady who's one of the daughters of very dear old friends of mine in Princeton, Victoria Dugan, on her 14th birthday. And I was combining that notion with what it would have been like to have been a Victorian child in Victorian age. And, weaving in that with the innocence of childhood, yet we read in the storybook childhood, but also people did have them. And the whole notion of being fancy-free in the world, which we surely are as our most innocent selves, and we begin in life. So, whatever place that was, whatever form that took for you, maybe this will spark a little bit of that now or later. It's called Victorianly Happy To be Victorianly happy is to play tiddlywinks and lawn tennis on sunny or any afternoons, watch magic lantern shows, listen to bright-tunicked bands at the bandstand in the heart of the green-leafed park, go to the zoo to see the lions fed, though not fed little girls, take a train down to the seaside with a summer frock, straw hat, small blue pail, and shovel, imagine tea with the Queen, sing Cherry Ripe or A Life on the Ocean Wave, join Alice in Wonderland. Here's a poem by Sharon Olds, so nascent in its way. It's called Earliest Memory. Light, not bright, but deep. No beams, light like heat, enclosed, a roomful like a mouthful of light, and bars, upright, that interrupt the light, stripe it evenly. Light, bar, light solid as pond water, bar a bluish shadow, another amber band of light, someone moving across it, into the narrow door of the bar and out again, through the perfect intervals of light, dark, light. The figure ranges slowly, freely. The bars do not waver. Vertical, still, they hold. The light does not dilute. It is full, steady. Within it the person moves, large and calm, back and forth, and at times, behind and above her, for a moment, the white angle of the wall and ceiling bent like a wing, border of the sweet box of the room where she swam in light, delicately striped, where I lay whole and watched. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. Thank you to her. For decades I was, as some of you know or have heard, a winemaker, among other things, with my extraordinary Italian father-in-law, Leonardo, and the Famiglia from Italia. And the memorable times around the makings of the wine, all different aspects of the makings and the uncorkings were so many. And I celebrated that at the time, and I have ever since, especially when I pull this poem back out as I have here around this program, and took me right back into it all as poems and stories and those kind of memories, written or otherwise, can do. It's called Song of the Old Crusher, and of course refers to the crushing of the grapes and the old equipment we had that belonged to his parents and my mother-in-law's parents that we used, so they were imprinted with all sorts of interesting energy from the ancestors. Song of the Old Crusher. The wheel handle of the still sturdy iron and wood crusher, handed down from old world to new, old man to eager, turns and, like a hurdy-gurdy, sings sweetly with its ripe mouthfuls of Merlot and Grenache and other grapes, squeezing the joy from the falling fruit that will soon ferment and season with age into stronger and deeper melodies, to fill and fancy other outstretched mouths. Well, I imagine many of us would agree that it can be quite grand when you remember to tune your ears to life's music, now and in your memory, or in literal music of other cultures, through their songs and tunes and melodies and symphonies. And one of the instruments that always takes me into all sorts of places, memories and cultures and stories and the past and sort of vintage imaginings, is the accordion. And I'd written this for an Englishman who was a marvelous accordion player. I don't know if he's still alive. I hope he might be. He'd be quite up there in age. Tony Compton. It's called The Accordion's Song. The accordion, the bellows of jaunty old French and Italian fellows, conjuring up left-bank cafes, smiling with lovers and handsome roués, breezy nights under striped awnings, soft candlelights. Old-world days we imagine living in, drinking in, days of berets and gay Parisians, of Fellini-filmed Romans and sun-skinned Sicilians. Dancing days long gone, but suddenly recalled by the sweet and carefree breathing of an old accordion song. All right, more here for us. So, here's a pioneering scientist that I didn't know about on memory, the value of our unremembered work and the incalculable sum total of the human experience. His name was pioneering biochemist Erwin Chargaff. Lived from 1905 to 2002, and this is from his book, Heraclitean Fire, Sketches from a Life Before Nature. So I'm going to give us a slice of that. If we could not forget, by the way, it's a lyrical memoir, just so you know, on the poetics of curiosity and the power of being an outsider, so not to think it's just very scientific. If we could not forget, he said, we could not remember, just as only the trembling balance can weigh. There are nights with a rose tint, there are days black with clouds, a groan from a deathbed, a hand on my hair, a voice out of the pyre of forgottenness. The ashes do speak, but it is a broken murmur, brief reflections of brightness, as from a shattered mirror, play over the blackness of an ever-present past. I tell what I am told. Who is the speaker? If it is memory, then why does it sometimes whisper, sometimes shout, often chatter, and mostly remain in sullen silence? That most of this activity did not lead to anything handed on to posterity was perhaps a pity, but does this count in the face of a human life? Does not the great corpus mysticum of the world contain all that was once felt or thought, suffered or overcome, created or forgotten, whether written or unwritten, made or destroyed? Are we not, in this sense, parts of a greater organism, kept alive through the ever more vividly circulating blood of an enormous past? Well, that's something to chew on. I'm still chewing on it. I'm going to continue. Musing on memory and these things led me to ponder a bit about photography. And I came across photographer Sally Mann's book, Hold Still, very interesting book. Might intrigue some of you. And she said this in that. As far back as 1901, Emile Zola telegraphed the threat of this relatively new medium, remarking that you cannot claim to have really seen something until you have photographed it. What Zola perhaps also knew or intuited was that once photographed, whatever you had, quote, really seen would never be seen by the eye of memory again. It would forever be cut from the continuum of being, a mere sliver, a slight, translucent paring from the fat life of time, elegiac, one-dimensional, immediately assuming the amber quality of nostalgia, an instantaneous memento mori. Photography would seem to preserve our past and make it invulnerable to the distortions of repeated memorial superimpositions, but I think that is a fallacy. Photographs supplant and corrupt the past, all the while creating their own memories. As I held my childhood pictures in my hands, in the tenderness of my, quote, remembering, I also knew that with each photograph, I was forgetting. So on how the living of life impresses itself upon our memory, she also writes this in there. When an animal, a rabbit say, beds down in a protecting fence row, the weight and warmth of his curled body leaves a mirroring mark upon the ground. The grasses often appear to have been woven into a bird-like nest, and perhaps were indeed caught and pulled around by the delicate claws as he turned in a circle before subsiding into rest. This soft bowl in the grasses, this body-formed evidence of hair, has a name, an obsolete but beautiful word, muse, M-E-U-S-E, muse, enticingly close to muse, daughter of memory and source of inspiration. Each of us leaves evidence on the earth that in various ways bears our form. So, she said, no snapshot can do what the attractive mnemonic impediment can. When we outsource that work to the camera, our ability to remember it is diminished, and what memories we have are impoverished. Proust has his answer, and is the one I take most comfort in. It ultimately resides in the loving and in the making and in the living of every present day. Thank you, Sally Mann. Well, I would say, just my own footnote to some of this, is that as a longtime visual poet, beyond being a written, spoken, and experiential one, I do know that I can, you can, one can create a whole lyrical storyland and feeling state, a place people can enter with certain imagery, and that endures, and that can be quite resonant. So, in its own way, I wanted to say that that's what sparked me as I read that. Teju Cole, also on photography, from his book of essays, Known and Strange Things. Photography is inescapably a memorial art. It selects out of the flow of time a moment to be preserved, with the moments before and after falling away like sheer cliffs. At a dinner party earlier this year, I was in conversation with someone who asked me to define photography. I suggested that it is about retention, not only the ability to make an image directly out of the interaction between light and the tangible world, but also the possibility of saving that image. A shadow thrown onto a wall is not photography, but if the wall is photosensitive and the shadow remains after the body has moved on, that is photography. Human creativity since the beginning of art has found ways to double the visible world. What photography did was to give the world a way to double its own appearance. The photograph results directly from what is, the light that travels from a body through an aperture onto a surface. And he says, but when the photograph outlives the body, when people die, scenes change, trees grow or are chopped down, it becomes a memorial. And so on, he talks. But thought you'd like that. Well, around the span of our lives and all the memory they hold, right? And when someone goes, all those memories go with them. Incredible body, literally, metaphorically, of memory of someone's life, especially if they've been around a long time, that we accumulate while we're here on Earth. So I naturally touched into the inescapable fact of each of our goings at some point, and all of that with it, and that made me think of Mark Strand's poem, The End. Not every man knows what he shall sing at the end, watching the pier as the ship sails away, or what it will seem like when he's held by the sea's roar, motionless, there at the end, or what he shall hope for once it is clear that he'll never go back. When the time is past to prune the rose or caress the cat, when the sunset torching the lawn and the full moon icing it down no longer appear, not every man knows what he'll discover instead. When the weight of the past leans against nothing, and the sky is no more than remembered light, and the stories of Cirrus and Cumulus come to a close, and all the birds are suspended in flight, not every man knows what is waiting for him, or what he shall sing when the ship he is on slips into darkness, there at the end. Thank you, Mark Strand. From the Daily Stoic, on that wavelength. They were saying this: there is one simple fact that most of us are utterly scared to meditate, reflect on, and face head on. We are going to die. Everyone around us is going to die. Such reminders and exercises take part of memento mori, the ancient practice of reflection on mortality that goes back to Socrates. Meditating on your mortality is only depressing if you miss the point. It is, in fact, a tool to create priority and meaning. It's a tool that generations have used to create real perspective and urgency, to treat our time as a gift and not waste it on the trivial and vain. Well, from one of the great Stoics himself, I thought we should have a few words in his own voice on mortality and the key to living fully. He said the only thing that isn't worthless, to live this life out truthfully and rightly, and be patient with those who don't. Alexander the Great, he said, and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. They were absorbed alike into the life force of the world, or dissolved alike into atoms. Keep this constantly in mind, that all sorts of people have died, all professions, all nationalities. Follow the thought all the way down to Philistine, Phoebus, and Oregonian, now extended to other species. We have to go there too, where all of them have already gone, the eloquent and the wise, The heroes of old, the soldiers and kings who followed them, the smart, the generous, the hard-working, the cunning, the selfish, and even those who laughed at the whole brief, fragile business. All underground for a long time now. And what harm does it do them? Or the others either, the ones whose names we don't even know. As you said, I just said it ago before, the only thing that isn't worthless is to live this life out truthfully and rightly and be patient with those who don't. Thank you, Marcus Aurelius. Always worth dipping into, I think. Well, this took me to Mary Oliver's poem. That sprang to mind, her beautiful questions for each and all of us. Here it is, her poem. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you, Mary Oliver, always. So among all these other musings for us, I and myself, not just on the passings, but on parts of our life passages and honorings of some of those passages and rememberings of some of those passages. And here in Rhode Island last May came this poem on Memorial Day. It came up into me. And it's called Me-Morial Day. M-E-tilde-Morial Day. Mine and yours. When we might also honor the times we fell by some wayside in our life, heroically or simply humanly, or might commemorate the loss of some cherished part of ourself, maybe a sense of youth, innocence, once deep wonderments, might raise a flag or pin a flower to our heart to remind ourselves we're still alive, still making our way, still making our own worthy history. But there are definitely figures out there, for me certainly, that of a kind that I always feel worth memorializing. And back in 2005 in the autumn in New York City and Upper West Side, I came across a large group, hundreds of firemen in their full dress outfits, honoring their lost ones. And it was very moving, and it was silent as I came through the park and came up around that event, and they were in silence. And this poem flowed into me. It's called Monumental Men. Legions of firemen stand underwater on Riverside and West End, soaked to the blue of their brass-buttoned coats and stiff round hats, as they line the streets in the drenching rain to commemorate all the firemen now under stone, those fallen into the flames of history and the quiet of memory, monumental men who, too, stood here once to honor their heroes. So other things vital to remember, at least in my book of life, is to remember your heroic nature. There are handfuls, heartfuls of things I believe matter and that we ought to remember on day to day and across our lives, and that's one of them. This is one of them, this poem speaks to that. It's called "You Are the Hero of Your Story, the one to brave the way, to risk and pave your way, the one to rise from your depths to your heights, dimensions far greater than you realize, ever thought, or were told you had. to summon the courage to live or ease or save your only life, for only you can. Yes, you are the hero, that heroic being already waiting in the wings. Greg Lavoie, in his book Callings, that I've spoken of him other times for other reasons, but the book is marvelous. It's so inspiring. I'm not even finished, but I'm already going to plan to reread it. He said, if you were to retell your own life story as a myth, as the most persistent theme in myth, which is the myth of the hero's or heroine's journey, you would become the hero or heroine, and your earthly struggles, rather than being taken so personally, would become mythic in scope, recast as plot twists in an epic adventure. The calling you seek becomes the treasure. The obstacles to your path become the tests of initiation you must endure, and friends become the hero's guardians. You would see the big picture of your life, the way it looked from the height of orbit, from the depth of the unconscious, from the press box on Mount Olympus, where the gods sip mint juleps and watch the game. So I encourage us to remember to ask all kinds of questions, whether the Mary Oliver-esque questions or some of the ones other poets are asking or I'm asking of myself and life, deeper questions like, am I doing all I possibly can with my life? And if not, why not? And if not now, when? I think it's lovely to remember the strangers that we've encountered who've touched us in some indelible way, who've even shaped us somehow or certainly animated us. And here's one from the Uptown Farmers Market in Port Townsend, Washington, back in September of 2010. And this was for Rachel Van Lannen. It's called The Runaway Smile. Never forget it. If I close my eyes, I can picture it and the energy of it anytime. She had a smile you could run away with, a smile blooming sun and soul, marrowstone roses and pasture grasses, ripe blackberries and honest beauty, blue water and red earth, this lady farmer from Mystery Bay, sharing her milkmaid smile and the hawthorn fruits of her alpine goats. A runaway smile. Remember to breathe. I know, a lot of people forget. So I'll remind you, and you can remind others. Remember to breathe as this poem. Inhale now. Exhale then. Inhale possibility. Exhale impossibility. Inhale tenderness. Exhale loneliness. Inhale freedom. Exhale boredom. Inhale you, all of you. Keep breathing. Remember to praise all that you are, whoever and however you are right now, and whatever you're becoming, all your fruitfulness. Here's a Rilke poem. To praise is the whole thing, is the title. To praise is the whole thing. A man who can praise comes toward us like ore out of the silences of rock. His heart that dies presses out for others a wine that is fresh forever. When the God's energy takes hold of him, his voice never collapses in the dust. Everything turns to vineyards. Everything turns to grapes, made ready for harvest by his powerful south. The mold in the catacomb of the king does not suggest that his praising is lies, nor the fact that the gods cast shadows. He is one of the servants who does not go away, who still holds through the doors of the tomb trays of shining fruit. Thank you, Rilke. And remember how you livingly bridge past, present, and future in your being. David White's poem, Mamine, speaks to that, to just that, actually, very much. Be infinitesimal under that sky. The creature even the sailing hawk misses, a wraith among the rocks where the mist parts slowly. Recall the way mere mortals are overwhelmed by circumstance, how great reputations dissolve with infirmity, and how you, in particular, live a hair's breadth from losing everyone you hold dear. Then look back down the path as if seeing your past, and then south over the hazy blue coast as if present to a wide future. Remember the way you are all possibilities you can see, and how you live best as an appreciator of horizons, whether you reach them or not. Admit that once you have got up from your chair and opened the door, once you have walked out into the clean air toward that edge, and taken the path up high beyond the ordinary, you have become the privileged and the pilgrim, the one who will tell the story, and the one coming back from the mountain who helped to make it. Thank you, David White. Remember to grow and to keep growing all life long. Flower song. When you allow your garden to grow wild with sunlight, to grow open with heart light, everything thrives, everything sings, even the flowers. Remember to let go. Jane Hirschfield's poem, Harness. Little soul, you and I will become the memory of a memory of a memory. A horse released of the traces forgets the weight of the wagon. Remember, there is magic in the world, great and small. J.B. Priestley had this to say, I have always been delighted at the prospect of a new day, a fresh try, one more start, with perhaps a bit of magic waiting somewhere behind the morning. And as we wind toward the end of our time for now, remember to stay open to each moment of your aliveness. This poem is called Blink. You open your eyes. Just born. You're here. Newly arrived. Wildly, preciously alive. A bright body of energy, feeling all possibility. A fresh canvas. Blink. You open your eyes. Just awake. You're still here. Newly arrived. Alive decades later. A bigger body of energy, feeling possibility now. A wondrous work in progress. Blink. Each moment is your moment to enter. Open to, be wildly alive in. Bring all your energy, feeling, possibility to. The heart and art of here and nowness. Blink. And remember that you can fly. Yes, you can. Here are your wings to fly with. No need to wait for any other sign from heaven or earth. Just open to the change, to the favoring winds of possibility. Off you go. Thank you, each and all again, for listening in, floating and feeling in. All thanks to everyone helping to support these programs and my poetic arts, greatly devoted to nourishing spirits, uplifting hearts, and sparking greater awareness and aliveness. You can donate any amount by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site or by regular mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island 02891. I also invite patrons to bring me their way for a month or longer this summer or fall as a private poet in residence on their property to create a new flight of work to share with and dedicate to them. I likewise invite like-spirited collaborators, musical to theatrical, to reach out to explore pairings of artistic possibilities and promise. Meanwhile, send along your comments, questions, suggestions. Email Colin at thepoetorialist.com. Do remember that replays are online for re-listening or sharing. I hope you'll lean in again next week, or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to enjoying the fruits and fascinations of memory and remembering everything vital that transcends the mundane, that defines, dilates, and deepens your humanness and your uniqueness. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.